it's really important for us to begin this conversation with the phenomenal work and the important role of our clinical colleagues in advancing this work. I want to sort of start to welcome our clinical experts to the table. They will be joining our first sessions to talk through the resources we have on the playbook for our clinical colleagues specifically, and also for, let me just unpin this one for a second. And I'm going to ask my colleague Jean to start walking us through and showcasing just a little bit of the clinician's dossier that we've prepared for all of you. It was really interesting in thinking about the different learning archetypes that we would need to sort of address to ensure that the playbook was able to achieve its goals of really advancing the field. And when we thought about what our clinical colleagues may need in order to sort of successfully advance the field, we gravitated back to what Amy was underscoring during her remarks, the need to build trust. Our clinical colleagues have been at the helm of thoughtful, patient-focused care since the history of healthcare began. How could we empower our clinical colleagues with that lingua franca, with that common unifying language, with sort of understanding the key basics when it comes to advancing digital clinical measures? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask the experts working on the clinical team to share their videos, and we'll have a conversation and walk you through how it came to be that we created the resources we did with the playbook. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight our colleagues. While I do that, I think it's really important. I didn't land that terribly well. The resources that we created for our clinical colleagues are an entire fundamentals course in digital clinical measurement. We were able to really think about what are the 7 core learning objectives to make our clinical colleagues, regardless of background, whether they're practicing physicians, nursing colleagues, pharmacist colleagues, occupational physical therapists, really making this, here are the key items that you need to learn. And what you'll see when you go to the dossier is that there are 7 different modules, that there's tutorials, that there are slides available, that there are quizzes, and it really walks you through everything you might need if you're a practicing clinician and are sort of inspired to get a little bit more comfortable with these digital clinical measures. So enough from me. Let's meet the phenomenal clinicians and other experts who worked on this dossier to advance the field. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn to go ahead and introduce yourself and either talk about how you and your clinical practice are using digital clinical measures, or why you decided to participate in this tour on the playbook. And I'm going to start with you, Adam.
Hey everyone, thanks so much. My name is Adam Phillips. I'm a cardiologist by training and on the Digital.Health team at MyoKardia, which is now Bristol Myers Squibb after an acquisition. And I think the common theme from this morning so far has been about the lingua franca, and the playbook has really been cool from a clinician perspective because it provides a sort of foundation and framework for how to understand these digital measures. As clinician, we love frameworks for understanding things. It's a complicated world in medicine, and all we want is a framework to simplify things, to give us a pathway forward. And that's one thing that this playbook really does for clinicians. That's what I'm most excited about.
Fantastic. And Adam, it was such a pleasure to get to work with you. One of the things that Amy said was the importance of having fun with this, and I think we certainly did that in this work group. So appreciate you being part of it, and I appreciate all of your hard work and for being with us this morning. Daniel, do you want to go next?
You're muted.
Yeah, I've got it. Hey, I'm Daniel Kraft. I'm a physician scientist type in the San Francisco Bay Area. Recently founded a platform called Digital.Health. Also share medicine for Singularity University and run a program called Exponential Medicine, where we look at all these convergences coming together to reshape health and medicine across the continuum, which is really the sweet spot for, I think, digital health and medicine. And I think what's so key about the playbook and beyond is how we pull our clinical colleagues into this endeavor and help catalyze digital health going forward in meaningful ways for clinicians to leverage it and for our patients to benefit. Thanks.
Fantastic, Daniel. Really glad you're a part of this, and thanks for being with us this morning. Justin, do you want to go next?
Of course. Good morning from the East Coast here, everyone. Before I introduce myself, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Jen and Jean for inviting us to participate, and also for my sprint team participants. It was a pleasure to work with and learn from all of you. And I've learned more over the past few months than I have, in a while, just from the interdisciplinary thought. But a little bit more about myself is I'm Justin Richard. I am the center manager at the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health. I'm a health informatician by training, and my background is in health IT and workforce development. And my focus around digital clinical measures are managing and implementing systems that are utilized by the workforce to drive the adoption of digital clinical measures, and accounting for the technical literacy of end users that will be working with these digital clinical measures. So I come from that side. And it was a really great experience being able to learn from and work with clinicians who will be using the digital clinical measures.
Thank you, Justin. And you were a very good sport as the tech guy, or the IT guy sometimes even, on the team. I know you wear that hat up at Brown Lifespan, and appreciated you bringing that important insight to the table here. Risa, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon to all. I'm Risa Vatanka, Senior Director of Corporate Alliances at the American Pharmacists Association. As a pharmacist, I've been a champion for digital health integration in pharmacy, and founder and chair of a couple of digital health conferences, both at the state level and with the California Pharmacists Association, and at the national level with the American Pharmacists Association. And the aim has really been to increase awareness among pharmacists and all across the healthcare ecosystem on opportunities for medication optimization, leveraging digital health technologies, digital clinical measures, all of that. It's been an absolute pleasure being on this tour. I'm amazed, continuously amazed by you, Jen and Jean. It's incredible what you've done with running this tour, and it's been great being part of this sprint group. I am confident that the tools and resources that we've built to add on to the playbook really will help increase healthcare providers' understanding and drive adoption of applying these tools in patient care.
Fantastic. Thanks, Risa. And it was such a pleasure to work with you on the tour. For intros, last but not least, Xuemei, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. And I'd like to echo my fellow panelists and group here that this tour has been amazing, and it's been amazing to participate. I'm the head of clinical research at digital medicine at Pfizer. But actually for this group, I was actually wearing a little bit of my other hat. So I'm also a neurointensivist. I practice at Tufts Medical Center in Boston. And when I first joined the tour, I was really thinking about these digital measures in terms of clinical trial implementation. But as a clinician who is seeing patients, we sometimes think of it as, clinicians working in the trenches, frontline, really kind of seeing patients and having to, figure out the workflow and learn about these things on the fly sometimes when there's a lot of other competing interests and competing, time processes where, there's EHR, there's, insurance, there's all sorts of very complicated factors in the real world. And so thinking about how to, as Adam said, really people want a framework to come up with how to learn and integrate these tools, and really excited to have participated in this clinicians tour of duty to really start putting the foundations for laying out an educational course and a learning opportunity for clinicians.
Fantastic, Xuemei. It was so wonderful to have your perspective on as part of this team, and your sort of leadership on the curriculum as well, along with everyone else. So this is how I'm going to remind folks how we're going to handle our discussions today. Jean's going to drop the link to the clinicians dossier into the chat. We're not going to present it, but rather we're going to learn from the experts on the line, sort of why, or a little bit more about their practice, about their use of digital clinical measures, and how these what we've tried to achieve here with the clinician's dossier, the educational resources will hopefully sort of build that bit of trust to move things forward. And Adam, I'm going to start with you if I can. So, you're a cardiologist. It's a specialty that I think is a little bit further ahead perhaps than other sort of therapeutic areas in terms of their embrace of digital clinical measures. How are you currently, if at all, using these measures and or using digital clinical measurement tools in the way you treat your patients?
Yeah, I'll sort of pick up on two things that you're saying there. One is, in addition to clinicians loving frameworks, we also are slow to change or slow to adopt new technologies. And I think that's by design. That's a feature of being a clinician, not a bug. That we want to be as prudent as we can. We want to be slow to change because a lot of times the new shiny object is not what's best for our patients. So although cardiology is sort of in the lead for a lot of this adoption, it's really based more on patient need than something about cardiologists. I think when we as clinicians are thinking about what patients need, we're not thinking about digital health measures versus non-digital health measures. We're thinking about what tools are there to acquire the information I need to diagnose, manage, and treat this patient. So in cardiology, some of the things that have really taken off are things like AFib burden monitoring or home blood pressure, things like that, where a patient leaves the hospital and I think, is this patient going to be an AFib and how much AFib will they have? And so there's a really fit for purpose device that can answer that question for me. You're never sitting in the clinic thinking, how can I employ a digital health tool on this patient? You're thinking more, what needs does this patient have? And are there different tools that I can use in my toolbox to sort of help get over that need?
Adam, I really like your remarks here. And I think it even teases on some things that Amy was saying earlier, right? We have to earn the trust, right? And I think, the scientific work takes some time. And so I think, as you said, it's probably a feature, not a limitation, that our clinical colleagues are being quite deliberate in selecting these things. I also, what you echoed in terms of a clinician's thinking reflects a lot of what we articulate in the playbook, the need to start with a measure, not the shiny technology. And so perhaps for folks who, why are we seeing, a lot of use of these technologies, but not a lot of pickup in clinical care? It's because when you start with the measure, when you think about the problem you're trying to solve for instead of the gadget, there's a little bit more work to do, and you may take pause and even ask yourself whether the technology solution is the right one. I love it. Fantastic remarks. Xuemei, I want to come to you next. Like Adam, you are, as you said, a practicing physician, and you are in a sort of leadership role in advancing digital in pharma. One of the things that was really interesting in putting this together was sort of scouring the literature for, where's the successfully re-engineered clinical workflow that accommodates these tools? And, it's hard to find. These are entrenched processes. These are complex teams. How are you seeing the necessary changes to accommodate these tools being possible, being practical, recognizing that we can't ask our clinical colleagues to do any more?
Yep, that's a great question, Jen. So I think as Adam has already alluded to, healthcare is a very risk-adverse field in terms of not wanting to take on anything that may cause harm. And really, I think building into de-risking, adoption and encouraging people to look into this field is really building the internal processes that are necessary to be able to help clinicians and healthcare systems understand the best practices. And to build that too, there's also currently probably a lack of internal expertise really in the field where there's not as much knowledge, or if there is knowledge, it's really siloed. And in order to communicate across different specialties and across different systems, it's, we really have to break down some of those barriers. And then overall, there's probably a perception of, this is a black box situation where things seem, very complicated if you just read about it superficially. We don't currently teach this in medical school in terms of integration, even though, it might come up across as very complicated. If you think about it, human anatomy, physiology, and pathophysiology are also very complicated topics. but they've been really laid out in a very nice framework for people to understand. You don't learn about what can go wrong until you learn about what can go right first and understand those processes. So the way it's taught currently in medical school, these very complicated topics, just build into this integration, through training and then through exposure to patient care, both in medical school and then, residency, fellowship, and specialization. And currently the field with digital is not quite that probably mature. But we're really starting to look at how to both teach people who are already within practicing, but then also potentially as Daniel in our team said at the very beginning, really reaching people from an earlier on in their training so that they can become sort of those influencers to create that knowledge base, break down silos, and really kind of create the resources needed to bring the field to more of a maturity way in order to develop the internal processes. That you can't really develop internal processes until you have that knowledge base to develop the processes, or else they may not be robust. So being able to assess for that and make sure that they're fit for purpose for the healthcare systems. As Adam also alluded to, it's really at the end of the day also about health outcomes and looking at it from the frame of not as a digital or non-digital, but really saying, how does this tool help me achieve the health outcomes I want to see, both either as a system, whether it's a systems base, whether it's a individual practice base of this improve my workflow in terms of seeing patients, to the patient experience of this improved this outcome for this population or for this single patient, and really seeing that evidence I think is going to help drive the research needed in the field to build out more evidence, and then again spread the knowledge, and then be able to refine the processes to continue to grow in the field.
Xuemei, I love that. You made a strong case for why it was our decision as a team to think about creating these really accessible sort of learning objectives, why we felt it was critically important to sort of bolster the sort of clinical exposure to this. Justin, Xuemei talked about the need to de-risk some of these measures and also sort of bolstering internal expertise. As our IT guy on the line, tell us how the sort of within health systems and clinics, our sort of technical colleagues in-house can help us make these decisions correctly.
Yes, so I think the most important thing that technical professionals can do is interview and work with stakeholders working on the front lines. And that is not solely clinicians, it's nurses, MAs, CNAs, people that will be interacting and utilizing these systems and workflows are your key to success in driving the adoption of these digital clinical measures. Because if you can't get the buy-in of those that will actually be utilizing the workflows, capturing the data and digesting it, you're really setting yourself up to failure. Another element which is critically important is accounting for technical literacy of the workforce. You need to design and implement and optimize based on your weakest link. And if you think of a workforce in a traditional health system, not every health system is unionized, but those that are unionized tend to have employees that have been there for a longer period of time, which suggests that you may have a higher average aged workforce with a lower technical literacy rate. And designing and accounting for them to make it easy to utilize and interact with systems and data that are related to digital clinical measures will really set you up for success. And I know I just said that was probably the most critical thing, but another element that is extremely important is making sure that those who are interacting with systems and with the data understand their role, who's consuming the data, who's interpreting and analyzing and presenting the data, who's just having discussions with the patient about the collected data. And in the tech space, we use use case diagrams to demonstrate how folks interact with systems and whatnot. But making sure that everyone across the continuum, the workflow continuum, understands most of the elements is also an incredibly important variable, because the person entering the data needs to understand what happens upstream and downstream, because ultimately workflows have a beginning and end, and understanding the elements within a workflow will really set you up for success in collecting data, analyzing it, implementing it, and using it to change outcomes.
And Justin, what I really like there is, Amy talked about, if we want to land this successfully, we need to have everyone at the table from the start. We can't just foist it upon folks at the end of the development sort of cycle. So you've really given great voice to that, and I really appreciate it. Daniel, I'd like to hear from you next. You've spent sort of the vast majority of your career being a sort of leading innovator in this space. How do you think about how we work with current practicing clinicians in this sort of wave of innovation? We've talked about the need to have sort of well-educated teams. We've talked about why we aren't moving at lightning speed. It's a thoughtful process. Like, how do we actually collaborate with those clinical colleagues, not serving them up the technologies and inviting them to buy in, but actually partnering with them on the development piece?
Sure. I mean, the challenge and opportunity is there's this explosion of digital health. COVID's certainly been a catalyst. There's the term often in drug development to have patients included, but I think it's critical to have clinicians, physicians of all sorts of providers integrated in. I think the role of the clinician is not only to hopefully be the utilizer of these emerging technologies, but they're often the need knowers, and the ability to validate, not just to see a clinical measure, but see how it impacts their patients on a day-to-day basis. And so I think the opportunity is to get involved. You don't need to be building the app or the device or the solution, but to work with the entrepreneurs, the regulatory folks, to understand really what's working when the metal hits the road for your patients, and in context, this idea of even precision digital health, meeting age, culture, language. 10 years ago, I gave a TED Talk, The Future of Medicine, there's an app for that. And at the time, I think there were 60,000 apps. Now there's almost 400,000 just on the app side. Many of them are more consumer, but they're more and more moving to medical with the intensive shifting for remote patient monitoring, et cetera. And so I think the real opportunity now is to help clinicians potentially match and find the solutions that meet their patients, ones that are validated, and then be able to provide the feedback mechanisms to keep improving and iterating to really meet the patient needs and to keep building the body of evidence as we move forward. So I think it's a collaboration, and clinicians can play a critical role going forward. Again, I think we're still in the early stages of digital. In many cases, we're still digitizing the fax machine, for God's sakes. And so now, the last decade was pretty incredible, but I think, let's say the next 5 and 10 years will make the last 10 years look slow. And so we all need to sort of row together and help build the systems to not just have an overwhelming amount of apps, wearable solutions, but to really validate them and get them to really meet clinical problems across the continuum, from public health to cancer care to mental health and beyond.
Daniel, that's such a powerful call to action, and appreciate you giving that voice. And Risa, I'm going to come to you to close out this fantastic panel. Daniel, and in fact, all of our colleagues have said, look, we need to have everyone at the table. We need to have our clinicians, regardless of background, at the table. You came to this as a passionate advocate for sort of our pharmacist colleagues. Tell us how, we can get better at engaging not only our pharmacist colleagues, but all practicing clinicians as we talk about, creating a sort of inclusive development environment.
Yeah, well, I think Dinah started in the right manner, because you've brought all voices to the table, right? It's really important that we leverage the capabilities of all clinicians, because studies show that, it reduces medical errors, right? It improves patient experience. We get improved outcomes, ultimately can reduce costs. So really having that interprofessional voice is really key. And I think that DIMES, this has been profound to have this tour of duty where you had voices from all across the healthcare ecosystem, right? We know that interprofessional learning fosters interprofessional practice. And so, these learnlets that we've created, the 7 modules, where it kind of really unpacks like what is, how do you define digital clinical measures, and how do you, what's the value to the patient, to the clinician, how do you integrate it into workflow, all of these things, having all from across the healthcare ecosystem learn together, right? I think that's going to help us also know how we can then work together as well in leveraging these tools, this additional data, and optimizing patient care. when you think of, we all look at a patient from a different perspective, right? So a physician may see a symptom and think of, what that diagnosis might be. A pharmacist may look at a symptom and think of it as, oh, what side effect of a medication could that be? So that's where, when you bring the different voices looking together, looking at these measures together, I think we'll each bring, we'll have a different type of value and how we can apply it in patient care. So I'm pretty excited about the rich potential, and for pharmacists specifically, I think it's going to really transform our approach to medication optimization. We're just going to have more visibility to data and information than ever before.
This is fantastic. Each of you have delivered not only your expertise to folks on the line today, you've worked incredibly hard for the last 6 months. It's almost I keep sort of checking myself when I look at the resources that everyone's created. The idea that we were able to create from scratch a fundamentals module for all clinicians, one that I hope is engaging, that I hope is meaningful, that can achieve everything that you articulated to really support our clinical colleagues in being involved in the thoughtful selection where appropriate of digital clinical measures, figuring out where tech solutions are fit for purpose and fit for purpose for all of the individuals that we're here to serve. And even those sort of collaborators and co-creators of new digital products. Working with all of you has been such an honor, such a pleasure. We've learned so much. The field will learn so much as a result of having these learnlets, this fundamentals module out in the world. So thank you, all of you. It was the right place to start with our clinical colleagues as we embark on this day of talking about the resources available. I hope you're able to stay with us for the rest of the day and really appreciate this journey we've been on in your time this morning.